Hey there, and welcome back to my channel. In this video, we're going to look at the Mexican-American War, which occurred from 1846 to 1848. So if you're ready to get those brain cows milked, let's get to it. Okay, so before we get into the causes of the war, let me just tell you how it's going to go down. In general, the Mexican-American War is broken up into three sections: the Northern Campaign and the Southern Campaign. And these happen simultaneously. The war begins with the United States annexing Texas, which Mexico still considers a part of their country. Then, the U.S. wanted more land, specifically all the land that is west of Texas and north of Mexico. And so the U.S. got what they wanted and Mexico lost a whole bunch of land. Oh, and at the end of the war, America decided to free all of the slaves in the land that they just took from Mexico. But anyway, let's get to those causes. Okay, so first off, let's talk about the United States. Why did they want to fight a war? Well, ever since the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, the United States had been inching its way westward. They had acquired Florida, Louisiana, and eventually Texas. And many Americans felt that the United States was destined to acquire all of the land that is north of Mexico. In other words, Americans believed in manifest destiny. Also, President James K. Polk was a bit of an expansionist. He wanted to acquire Texas all the way to the Rio Grande River. And he also wanted to acquire Oregon and all of the land that is north of California. And finally, he wanted to purchase California from Mexico. So basically, he wanted all of this land. But now let's consider the Mexican perspective. First of all, Mexico was dealing with a lot of internal strife. They had just overthrown their former emperor in 1823, and they were struggling to establish a new government. Also, Mexico was having trouble keeping Texas under their control. You see, in 1821, Mexico had granted autonomy to the state of Texas because they couldn't really keep it under control. And then, in 1836, Texas revolted against Mexico and declared itself an independent republic. And although this was a serious blow to Mexico, they never relinquished the claim that Texas was a part of their country. Finally, Mexico was in no position to stop the United States from taking their land. So now let's fast forward to April 1846, when U.S. troops crossed into disputed territory between Texas and the Rio Grande. Okay, that's pretty vague. Let me explain. You see, both countries claimed all of this land, and so no one was really sure where the border was. And so in order to find out once and for all where the border was, the U.S. sent a group of soldiers to do a survey. However, on April 25, 1846, a group of Mexican cavalrymen attacked the U.S. soldiers, and in the confusion, they killed one U.S. soldier and wounded another. This would be known as the Thornton Affair, or the incident at Palo, Alto. And even though it's unclear whether the attack was unprovoked, U.S. newspapers went wild with cries of "Remember the Alamo" and "Manifest Destiny." As a result, Congress declared war on Mexico. Okay, so at this point you might be saying, "Great, Mr. Teacher, I finally know how the Mexican-American War started." But let me tell you right now that historians debate the cause of the war to this very day. Some argue that President Polk provoked the war intentionally through his actions in the region. Others argue that the war was inevitable regardless of what happened in that skirmish between U.S. and Mexican soldiers. Regardless, when the war began, the United States was prepared. They simply had too much firepower for the Mexicans. And as a result, U.S. General Zachary Taylor led his troops to victory at the Battle of Palo Alto and the Battle of Resaca de la Palma, and then he marched into Mexico. Meanwhile, another group of U.S. troops led by General Winfield Scott landed in Mexico near Veracruz and then marched toward Mexico City. Now, before we go any further, I need to tell you about my good friends at Brilliance. What's that? Well, Brilliant is an online learning platform that offers courses in math, science, and computer science. The reason why I like them so much is because their interactive lessons are visually stimulating and super effective. For example, instead of just telling you that gravity affects objects with mass, They show you why it happens through animation and then have you complete interactive exercises to help you truly understand the concept. It's so easy and fun to learn, and I love sharing it with my students. But enough about that, let's get back to the video. Okay, so after defeating the Mexicans at the battles of Cerro Gordo and the fortress of San Juan de Ulua, Scott's troops entered Mexico City on September 13, 1847. Meanwhile, Taylor was pushing northward, and he engaged the Mexican army at the Battle of Monterrey in April of 1846. Although the battle raged for 2 days, Taylor's troops won, and this convinced Polk that the war was going well. However, not everything was going smoothly. The capture of Veracruz was costly, and General Scott had to retreat from some positions. Furthermore, Taylor's actions at Monterrey caused outrage in the United States because he freed all of the Mexican prisoners that he had captured, including the ones that had captured American soldiers. Now, most Americans didn't think slavery should be spread around, but they also thought it was kind of rude to free people who had captured their soldiers. But despite these setbacks, Taylor continued his advance into Mexico, and in February 1847, he defeated the Mexican army at the Battle of Buena Vista. And that was a big deal because the Mexicans had twice as many soldiers as the Americans. Unfortunately for Taylor, his fame would lead to his demise. When he contracted cholera and died in 1850, and he died while campaigning for president against Lewis Cass. But anyway, with Taylor out of the picture, Scott continued his march to Mexico City, and that brings us to the end of the war. You see, in August 1848, representatives from both countries met in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo to end the war. The treaty stipulated that Mexico would give up all claims to Texas, and in exchange, the United States would pay Mexico $15 million. Additionally, the United States gained all of this land, including present-day California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and parts of Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Wyoming. Finally, the treaty set the Rio Grande River as the border between the two countries. Okay, so who were the key players in this war? Well, as I mentioned earlier, General Zachary Taylor won several major battles for the United States, and in doing so became a national hero. He was then elected president, but died shortly into his term. Also, as I mentioned earlier, General Winfield Scott led troops to victory at Veracruz and then Mexico City. However, he was criticized for not being aggressive enough in certain instances. On the Mexican side, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna served as the president of Mexico throughout the duration of the war. He had previously fought against the Texans and had become famous by defeating them at the Battle of Alamo. However, his reputation suffered greatly after he lost to the United States. Okay, now let's finish up by talking about why this war was such a big deal. First of all, the United States gained a tremendous amount of land, and that caused several problems, including massive cultural differences, different economic interests, and a whole bunch of tension over slavery. Secondly, this war contributed significantly to the start of the Civil War. You see, as the United States acquired more land, the question of whether or not to allow slavery in these territories became more and more contentious. And that's not gonna end well. Finally, this war established the United States as a major power in North America. From this point forward, the U.S. would never relinquish any land on the continent, which is why they are jokingly referred to as the Uncle Sam Nation. Okay, click here to keep reviewing for Unit 7. And if you want me to keep making these videos, then by all means subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.